heard the sound for the first time at 1:47 in the morning. And what bothered me most was how ordinary it seemed at first. Just a single dull tap somewhere inside the house. Not loud enough to wake someone normally, not dramatic. The kind of sound people ignore every day without thinking twice. But I had been half awake already, drifting in that uncomfortable state where your mind notices things before your body fully catches up. And the moment I heard it, something in me locked onto it immediately. I stayed still in bed, staring into the darkness above me, while the ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, pushing warm air around the room in uneven waves. The house was quiet again, completely quiet. I almost convinced myself I imagined it until the second sound came. 3 soft knocks, slow, deliberate, somewhere downstairs. I remember checking my phone because the silence afterward felt so unnatural. 1:47 a.m. I kept staring at the time like it mattered. Then another knock came from farther away inside the house, and I realized the sound wasn't random. It was moving. At the time, I'd only been living there for about 2 months. The place belonged to an older man named Gerald who rented it cheaply because he planned on demolishing it eventually. He told me that directly when I first toured the property. Said the foundation had issues and the wiring needed work, but the rent was low, and I was desperate enough not to care. The house sat alone near the edge of a quiet street where most of the surrounding homes had already been renovated except this one. Even during the daytime, it looked older than everything around it. Narrow windows, long hallway, floorboards that dipped slightly near the kitchen. The kind of house where sounds carried strangely from room to room. I actually liked that at first. It felt lived in, real. Every place I rented before that had felt temporary. Generic apartment walls, thin ceilings. But this place had history in it. You could feel that immediately. The problem was that after a few weeks, I started learning the house too well. Every home has patterns. Once you live somewhere long enough, your brain catalogs every normal sound automatically. The refrigerator clicks every 40 minutes. Pipes shift when someone showers. Wind rattles certain windows harder than others. You stop noticing these things consciously because repetition turns them into background noise. That's why unfamiliar sounds stand out so sharply. Your mind catches them before you even understand why. The first knock felt unfamiliar. The second felt intentional. I stayed awake until sunrise, listening for more sounds, but nothing else happened that night. By morning, I already felt embarrassed about how scared I had been. Houses make noise, old houses especially. I told myself that repeatedly while making coffee. I even laughed quietly once because I remembered how frozen I felt lying there in the dark, listening to harmless creaks. But that night at exactly 1:47 a.m., the knocking returned. 1 knock, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Then something dragged slowly across the ceiling above my bedroom. I sat upright immediately. The dragging sound lasted maybe 4 seconds. Just long enough to picture something heavy moving across the floor directly above me, even though there was no second floor above my bedroom, only attic space. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I bought a flashlight and a small stepladder so I could check the attic. I remember feeling stupid carrying the ladder through the hallway in broad daylight, because fear always shrinks once the sun comes up. The attic entrance sat above the hallway closet with one of those square wooden panels you push upward. Dust fell onto my shoulders when I opened it. The smell hit first. Dry wood. Insulation. heat trapped beneath old shingles. I climbed halfway up and shined the flashlight around. Nothing, just beams, boxes, cobwebs. Then I noticed something strange near the far side of the attic floor. Trails. Not footprints exactly, more like long, narrow drag marks through the dust, leading toward the darkest corner near the roof slope. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself raccoons or rats could have caused them. But the lines looked too straight, too deliberate, like something heavy had been pulled repeatedly across the same area. I climbed down almost immediately after that. That night, I kept every light in the house on. DTD 147. The knocking started again. Only this time, it came from inside the hallway wall beside my bedroom. 3 knocks. Then silence. Then 1 knock directly outside the bedroom door. I remember the exact feeling that hit me then because it wasn't panic yet. It was recognition. Some part of my brain understood before I did that the sounds were following a pattern. They were getting closer. I opened the bedroom door instantly, nothing there. The hallway lights glowed softly against the old wallpaper. Complete silence, but the air felt colder outside the room than it should have. I walked through the entire house, checking locks and windows while trying not to breathe too loudly. Everything was secure. Then, while standing in the kitchen, I heard another sound from the living room behind me. A chair creaked slowly. Not the sharp crack of wood settling. The sound of weight shifting. I didn't turn around immediately. I couldn't. Every instinct told me something would be sitting there if I looked too fast. I stood frozen with one hand on the kitchen counter, listening to the silence that followed. Then finally, I forced myself to turn. The room was empty, but one of the dining chairs had moved slightly away from the table. Not much, just enough that I noticed. I started sleeping less after that. Every night the sounds returned at the same time, always beginning with knocks, always changing location. Some nights they came from the attic, other nights from beneath the floor near the hallway, once from inside the bathroom wall while I brushed my teeth. The patterns became more noticeable too. 3 knocks usually meant the sounds were farther away. 1 knock meant close. If I heard dragging afterwards, something in the house would be different by morning. Small things at first. Kitchen cabinets slightly open, closet doors I knew I had closed. 1 framed picture tilted sideways. Then stranger things started happening. I'd wake up to find lights turned on in rooms I never entered during the night. The television switched channels by itself twice while I watched. One afternoon I came home from work and found the attic panel hanging slightly open even though I hadn't touched it in days. That bothered me more than anything else. Not because I thought someone was inside the house, because the panel opened inward. Something had pushed it down from above. I stopped inviting people over after that because I didn't want to sound insane explaining the noises. Eventually, I mentioned it to Gerald when he came by collecting paperwork. He listened quietly while smoking on the porch and nodded more than I expected him to. When I finished talking, he stared toward the street array for a long time before saying something that made my stomach tighten immediately. "The woman before you complained about sounds too." I asked what kind of sounds. He shrugged. Mostly knocking. The way he said it unsettled me because he sounded tired rather than skeptical, like he'd already had this conversation before and didn't want another one. I asked what happened to her. "She moved." That was all he said. I pressed him for details, but he avoided every question afterward. Changed the subject completely. The conversation ended with him reminding me the wiring was old and noises carried strangely through the walls. But right before leaving, he paused beside his truck and said something else without looking at me. "If you hear scratching, don't answer it." Then he drove away. I stood outside for several minutes afterward, trying to decide whether he was joking. The problem was that he hadn't smiled once. The scratching started 3 nights later. Soft, slow, inside the wall behind my bed. I remember lying there with every muscle locked tight, while the sound moved gradually downward through the wall cavity. It sounded almost careful, like fingernails brushing lightly across wood. Then came 3 knocks from somewhere beneath the floor. Pause. 1 knock directly beside my head. The scratching stopped immediately after that. I moved to the couch downstairs that same night. The living room felt safer because it was farther from the attic access, and because the television noise helped drown out smaller sounds. Around 2:30, I started drifting asleep when something knocked once beneath the coffee table directly in front of me. I sat up instantly. Another knock answered from inside the ceiling above the couch. Then silence. I didn't move for nearly an hour. The next morning, I found thin black marks beneath the coffee table, like something dirty had brushed against the wood from underneath. That was when I finally called my friend Marcus. Marcus had known me long enough to hear fear in my voice immediately. He came over that evening with beer and tried treating the whole situation casually at first. Old house, bad wiring, animals in the walls. He kept offering explanations because that's what normal people do when confronted with something uncomfortable. We stayed downstairs watching movies while I explained the patterns to him. Around midnight, he started teasing me about ghost stories, and I remember actually relaxing for the first time in weeks. Then, at exactly 1:47, the knocking started upstairs. Marcus stopped talking immediately. 3 knocks. Silence. Then dragging sounds moved slowly across the ceiling above us. I'll never forget the expression on his face because it matched exactly how I felt during those first nights. Confusion first, then recognition. The dragging stopped. A few seconds later, something knocked once from inside the hallway wall directly beside the living room. Marcus muted the television. Another knock answered from the kitchen, then another from somewhere above us. The sounds moved through the house like they were circling. Marcus whispered that someone might actually be inside the walls. That possibility honestly felt comforting compared to every other explanation forming in my head. We searched the house together room by room. Closets, windows, attic. Nothing looked disturbed until Marcus noticed something near the attic corner where the drag marks ended. Fresh insulation scattered across the floor. He crouched beside it and pointed toward the wood beneath. Scratches. Long parallel grooves cut directly into the beam. Not old marks either. Fresh splinters still clung to the edges. Marcus asked if I'd ever seen them before. I hadn't. While we stood there looking at the scratches, something knocked once directly beneath us from inside the ceiling below. The sound vibrated through the wood under our feet. Marcus climbed down the ladder immediately after that. We barely spoke the rest of the night. Around 3, he finally admitted the sounds didn't feel normal to him either. But he still insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Squatters, maybe. Structural issues. Hidden pipes. He kept reaching for explanations because the alternative sounded ridiculous, even while we listened to knocks move slowly through empty walls around us. Marcus stayed the night on the couch while I sat awake nearby pretending to watch television. At exactly 4:11 a.m., the scratching started inside the hallway wall. Marcus heard it too. The sound moved slowly downward through the plaster until it reached floor level near the bathroom door. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, the bathroom light switched on. Neither of us moved. The light stayed on for maybe 20 seconds before shutting off again. Then came one soft knock from inside the bathroom. Marcus left before sunrise. He tried hiding how shaken he felt, but while gathering his things, he asked me something strange. "Have you ever answered the knocks?" I said no. He nodded quickly, like that mattered somehow. "Good," he said. I asked why. Marcus hesitated for several seconds before answering. "Because it sounds like it wants you to." That sentence stayed in my head constantly afterward. It wants you to. The idea sounded absurd, but once it existed in my mind, I couldn't ignore how deliberate the sounds felt. They weren't random noises anymore. They behaved almost conversationally. Knock, pause, response, movement, patterns. The next week, things escalated slowly. The attic panel started opening on its own more often. Once I found dirt scattered across the hallway floor beneath it. Another time I woke up to hear footsteps above my bedroom ceiling moving carefully from one side of the attic to the other. Not animal sounds, actual steps with pauses between them. I stopped sleeping entirely after that. Exhaustion changes how fear works. During the first few nights, your body floods with panic every time something happens. But after enough sleepless nights, the fear becomes quieter, colder. You start adapting to it because your mind can't maintain constant panic forever. That's when I began noticing more details. The sounds only happened when I was alone. The knocking always started after I acknowledged the first sound. And the house felt different whenever the attic panel opened by itself. Heavier somehow, like the rooms became smaller. One night I decided to ignore everything completely. No reacting, no checking rooms, no listening at doors. I stayed in bed with headphones on and the lights off, pretending nothing unusual was happening. At 1:47, the first knock came from inside the wall beside my bed. I ignored it. 3 knocks answered from the hallway. Then silence. Minutes passed. Nothing else happened. I remember feeling relief spreading slowly through me because for the first time it seemed like the sounds had stopped once I refused to engage with them. Then the mattress shifted slightly behind my legs, like weight, pressing down onto the bed. Very slowly. I froze immediately. Another small shift followed closer to my feet, then breathing. Soft, uneven, directly behind me in the darkness. I didn't move for the rest of the night. When sunlight finally filled the room, I turned around expecting to find nothing there, but the blanket near my feet had been pulled halfway off the mattress onto the floor. After that, I stopped sleeping in the bedroom entirely. I spent most nights sitting in my car parked outside 24-hour stores until sunrise, because even exhaustion felt safer than being inside the house after dark. But eventually I always returned because I still didn't fully believe what was happening. Fear needs certainty to become permanent, and I kept searching for logical explanations, no matter how impossible things felt. Then I found the crawl space. It happened accidentally while cleaning the hallway closet. The back wall sounded hollow when I bumped into it moving boxes. At first I assumed old houses just had strange layouts, but after pushing aside enough storage containers, I noticed a thin wooden outline hidden beneath peeling paint near the floor. A door, small enough that I'd never noticed it before. No handle, just a narrow recessed gap along one side. I stared at it for several seconds before finally pulling it open. Cold air drifted out immediately, carrying a smell like wet earth and old wood. Behind the panel sat a narrow crawl space extending beneath the house. The beam from my flashlight revealed dirt floor, pipes, thick dust coating everything except for a narrow, disturbed path leading deeper into darkness. Something had been moving through there regularly. I should have closed the door immediately. Instead, I crawled inside. The space was barely tall enough to move comfortably. Every sound echoed strangely beneath the floorboards overhead. I followed the disturbed trail slowly while my flashlight shook in my hand. About halfway through the crawl space, I noticed marks scratched into the support beams. Vertical lines grouped together in fives. Tally marks, hundreds of them. The farther I crawled, the more marks appeared. Then I saw the chair, an old wooden dining chair positioned alone beneath the center of the house, facing toward the darkness ahead. I stopped moving immediately. There was no reason for a chair to be down there, especially not positioned so carefully. Something knocked once somewhere deeper in the crawl space beyond my flashlight beam. I backed away instantly. Another knock answered from above me inside the floor. Then breathing started somewhere ahead in the dark. Not loud, just close enough that I could hear the wet pull of air moving through someone's nose. I crawled backward so fast I slammed my shoulder against the beams, repeatedly getting out. By the time I climbed back into the hallway, I was shaking hard enough I nearly dropped the flashlight. The closet door behind me stood open for several seconds. Then very slowly, gently, it creaked shut on its own. I moved out 2 days later. I didn't even pack everything. Marcus helped me load my car while avoiding eye contact with the house entirely. I told him about the crawl space, but not the breathing, because saying it aloud made everything feel too real. Right before leaving, I walked through the rooms one final time, checking for anything important I forgot. The house felt strangely quiet, not empty, listening. While standing in the hallway near the closet, I noticed something on the wall beside the crawl space door. Fresh scratches, 3 parallel lines, chest height. I stared at them while a terrible realization settled into my stomach. The marks weren't there before, because before whatever made them had stayed low to the ground. Now they were higher, as if it no longer needed to crawl. I left immediately after that. For a while, things improved. My new apartment was smaller, brighter, newer. No attic, no crawl spaces. No strange sounds except ordinary city noise through the windows. I slept normally again for the first time in months. The fear faded slowly into embarrassment. I started convincing myself stress and isolation had distorted my thinking. Old houses can affect people psychologically. Sleep deprivation causes hallucinations. Every explanation sounded more reasonable in daylight. Then one night I woke up at exactly 1:47 a.m. because of a single knock from inside the apartment wall beside my bed. I knew the sound instantly, not because of how it sounded, because of how carefully it waited afterward. Silence stretched through the room, while my heartbeat hammered so hard I could hear it. Then 3 knocks answered from somewhere above me. I moved again after that. Then again 6 months later. Every place eventually developed the sounds. Not immediately, it always started small. One unfamiliar knock, a dragging sound overhead, scratching inside the walls. The patterns returned gradually each time, like something relearning the layout around me. I stopped telling people because nobody believed me except Marcus. And even he eventually stopped wanting to discuss it. The last time we talked seriously about the house, he asked me something I still think about constantly. What if it isn't attached to the building? I knew exactly what he meant. The realization had already started growing quietly in my mind by then. Maybe the sounds never belonged to the house at all. Maybe I carried them out with me the moment I crawled into that space beneath the floor. There are rules now that I understand better. The sounds grow stronger if you investigate them. Responding to knocks makes them move closer. Mirrors become dangerous after the scratching starts, because sometimes reflections lag slightly behind movement at night. And never follow footsteps if they stop outside a closed door. I learned that last rule in a motel 3 years later. I was traveling alone for work when footsteps began pacing outside my room around 2 a.m. Slow, measured, back and forth across the carpeted hallway. Eventually, they stopped directly outside my door. Then came one soft knock. I stayed silent. 3 knocks answered from inside the bathroom. The footsteps outside disappeared immediately after that. I never checked the hallway. By morning, there were wet footprints leading beneath the bathroom door from the inside. No water anywhere else, just the footprints. I still don't know why the sounds follow me. Sometimes months pass quietly before the patterns begin again. Other times they appear nightly for weeks. Crowded places help. Noise helps too. The sounds prefer familiarity, predictability. Once you learn a place completely, they enter the pattern easier. That's why I move often now. New homes, new sounds, new routines. But eventually every place becomes familiar. That's when the extra knock appears. Tonight feels different though. The apartment I'm staying in now has been quiet for almost 4 months. Long enough that I started relaxing again. Long enough that I stopped checking corners automatically before sleeping. Then earlier tonight while washing dishes, I heard a chair creak softly behind me in the living room. Not loud. Just the sound of weight shifting. Exactly like the first house. I didn't turn around immediately because after all these years, fear has changed shape for me. Panic burns out eventually. What remains is anticipation, recognition. I already knew what I'd see before I looked. One of the dining chairs sat slightly pulled away from the table. Nothing else. But underneath the chair were faint black marks on the floor like dirt dragged across wood. My stomach dropped instantly because I hadn't seen those marks in years. The dragging sound started an hour later, very faint, above the ceiling. Slow movement crossing from one side of the apartment to the other. Then silence. I checked the clock automatically, 1:46 a.m. 1 minute later, the first knock came from inside the kitchen wall. I'm listening to it now while writing this because writing helps organize the fear somehow, makes the patterns feel observable instead of personal. Another knock just answered from somewhere behind the bedroom wall. The apartment above me is empty. I confirmed that last week when the landlord mentioned renovations. The dragging sound started again while I wrote that sentence. Closer this time, directly overhead. I haven't looked up yet. There's another sound underneath it now too. Breathing. Faint enough that I almost mistook it for air moving through vents. But it pauses whenever I stop breathing myself. That's new. The worst part about all this isn't the fear anymore. It's how ordinary it has become. I hear impossible sounds and immediately start tracking patterns instead of reacting. 1 knock means nearby. 3 means farther away. Dragging means something changed. Scratching means don't look too closely at reflections. Fear becomes routine if it stays long enough. Maybe that's how this thing survives. People stop sounding believable after years of living beside impossible experiences. Eventually, you sound tired instead of terrified. I used to wonder what would happen if I ignored everything forever. Never investigated, never listened carefully, never acknowledged the sounds at all. But I think it adapts. The quieter you become, the closer it moves. Another knock just came from underneath the table beside my feet. Soft, careful, almost polite. I can hear movement in the hallway now too. Not footsteps exactly. More like fabric brushing slowly against the walls. The breathing stopped a few seconds ago. No, not stopped. Moved closer. There's a smell in the apartment suddenly. Damp earth, dust, old wood. The same smell from the crawl space. I think about that chair beneath the house all the time now. Why place it there facing the darkness? Sometimes I wonder if someone else sat there before me, listening to the same sounds, learning the same rules slowly over years, until fear became habit. Maybe that's what the tally marks counted, not days, not people, homes. I haven't checked the clock in several minutes because part of me already knows the time. Another knock just sounded directly behind me from inside the wall, close enough that I felt the vibration through the chair. The breathing is near my left ear now, very slow, wet, patient. I'm not turning around. That's the most important rule of all, because once the sounds become something you can see clearly, they stop being sounds forever.